My parents sold restaurant equipment to save my debt brother, but the real owner sent them to prison. Now you are unemployed. Poor you. My brother laughed. Look at you now. I burst out laughing because they did not know the truth about that restaurant. My name is Nicholas, and I am 32 years old. And this is the story of how my own family tried to ruin my life, but ended up ruining their own. I grew up in a family where there was always blatant favoritism. My parents, Hugo and Nora, never openly admitted it, but it was more than obvious that my younger brother Sebastian was the favorite of the house. He was 2 years younger than me, but from a young age he always received everything he asked for without having to put in much effort. When I asked for something, my parents would tell me that I had to earn it, or that there was not enough money. But when Sebastian asked for the same thing, the resources would suddenly appear out of nowhere, and he would get it just like that. The difference in treatment was so evident that even the neighbors noticed. I remember once the lady next door asked my mom why I was always working in the garden while Sebastian played video games. My mom got very upset and told her that each child had different responsibilities, and that it was none of her business how they educated their children. When I turned 18, I made the most important decision of my life. I decided I was not going to wait for anything from my parents anymore, and that I would build my own path without depending on anyone. I finished school, and instead of going to university as everyone expected, I got a job at a small neighborhood restaurant. My parents were extremely disappointed when I told them my decision. My dad, Hugo, told me I was wasting my life and that I would never amount to anything if I did not get a university degree. My mom, Nora, told me I was embarrassing her because what would her friends say when they found out her oldest son was a mere dishwasher? Sebastian, who was 16 at the time, laughed in my face and told me I was a failure, that I would never achieve anything important in life. His words hurt me, but at the same time, they gave me more strength to prove them wrong. My first job was exactly that. A dishwasher in a family restaurant called El Sabor d'Asa, which means the taste of home. It was a small but cozy place where they served homemade and traditional food. The first few months were very tough. I worked 8-hour shifts washing dishes non-stop. My hands would crack from the hot water and soap. I would come home exhausted with swollen feet and a sore back. But I never complained because I knew this was just the beginning. Another 2 years passed and I was still working at El Sabor d'Asa. By then, I was a line cook and had learned a lot about running a professional kitchen. The owner taught me everything he knew about restaurant management, inventory handling, cost control, customer service, and team leadership. He treated me like the son he never had, and I saw him as the mentor I always needed. Meanwhile, Sebastian had graduated from university, and my parents kept their promise. They sold a piece of land they owned and invested all that money in helping him set up his own import and export company. The company was called Commercial Sebastian, and he was so proud that he could not stop bragging to everyone he knew. When I was 28, the restaurant owner, Don Roberto, gave me news that filled me with both joy and sadness. He told me he was going to retire because his health was not the same, and he wanted to enjoy his last years resting. He offered to sell me the restaurant, but I did not have enough money to do it. He understood my situation and promised he would help me find a good job elsewhere because I deserved it, and he kept his word. A few months later, Don Roberto put me in touch with the owner of a new restaurant who was looking for an experienced general manager. The restaurant was called Los Delicios de Nico, which means Nikiko's Delights, and the owner was a foreigner who had invested a lot of money in this business, but did not live in the country and needed someone trustworthy to manage it completely. The owner's name was Marcus, and he was a European entrepreneur who had several businesses in different countries. He came personally to interview me and was very impressed with my experience and passion for gastronomy. He offered me the position of general manager with an excellent salary and complete autonomy to manage the restaurant as I saw fit. I accepted immediately because it was the opportunity I had been waiting for years. I started working at Los Delicios de Nico, and it was like starting a new life. The restaurant was much larger and more elegant than El Sabor d'Asa. We had a capacity for 100 people, a modern kitchen with state-of-the-art equipment, and a team of 25 employees, including cooks, waiters, bartenders, and cleaning staff. Marcus gave me total freedom to create the menu, hire staff, set prices, and manage all operational aspects of the business. He only wanted monthly financial reports, and for the restaurant to be profitable. I threw myself body and soul into that project because it was my chance to show everything I had learned over 10 years. The funny thing is that the restaurant was called Los Delicios de Nico, and my name was Nicholas, so technically the name was a huge coincidence that I found amusing. One day, while reviewing some documents in my office, a somewhat twisted idea occurred to me. What if I told my family that I was the owner of the restaurant? Technically, it would not be a complete lie because I managed it as if it were my own. But it would not be the truth either because the real owner was Marcus. The idea seemed interesting to me because I wanted to see the reaction of my parents, and especially Sebastian, after so many years of ridicule and scorn. At that moment, I had no idea that this little lie would trigger a series of events that would change my life forever. I decided to execute my plan one Sunday when I went to visit my parents, as I did every 2 weeks. I arrived at the house, and as usual, Sebastian was also there with his usual arrogant attitude. We sat down for lunch, and the conversation was typical. My parents asking Sebastian about his businesses, and him bragging about important contracts and millionaire profits. As always, I listened in silence, eating my food. Then suddenly, in the most casual voice possible, I said that, by the way, I was now the owner of a restaurant. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop. My parents stared at me with wide eyes, and Sebastian stopped chewing with a piece of meat halfway to his mouth. My mom, Nora, was the first to react and asked me if I was serious. I nodded, trying to maintain a neutral expression. I told them that after so many years working in the industry, I had finally managed to buy my own restaurant. My dad, Hugo, asked skeptically how I had gotten the money to buy a restaurant if I was just an employee. I explained that I had been saving for years and had gotten a loan to complete the necessary amount. Technically, I was not lying about the years of work and experience. I was just omitting some details. Sebastian looked at me with an expression of disbelief mixed with rage, as if he could not accept that his brother, the dishwasher, had achieved something like this. I could see his jaw clenching and his hands balling into fists. Finally, he said sarcastically that nobody cared that I owned a restaurant. Besides, he said he did not believe me. I replied that it was the truth, and that if he wanted, he could see for himself. He accepted the challenge immediately. That same afternoon, we agreed that the next day I would take them to the restaurant so they could see it. And so it happened. When we arrived at the restaurant and they saw the establishment, I noticed my parents' surprise. It was an elegant place with a modern and well-maintained facade. We went inside and several of my employees greeted me respectfully, calling me boss. I greeted them cordially and introduced them to my family. I gave them a complete tour, showing them the dining room, the kitchen, the storage areas, and even my office, which had my name on the door. I could see Sebastian observing everything with a bitter look on his face, while my parents seemed genuinely impressed. After the tour, I took them to the best table in the restaurant and ordered the special menu to be prepared for us. During lunch, my parents asked me many questions about the restaurant. How many employees did I have? What was the capacity? How had I gotten the location? I answered all their questions with half-truths because technically everything I said was true for my position as manager. When we finished eating and were saying goodbye, my mom said something that seemed strange to me. She congratulated me with a smile that did not reach her eyes and told me how good it was that I had finally achieved something in my life. My dad simply nodded and patted my shoulder without saying anything. Sebastian left without saying goodbye. During the following weeks, my family did not bring up the topic of the restaurant again, and I continued with my normal work routine. I thought my little lie would end there, and that I had simply shown them that I too could succeed in my own way. But things changed drastically a few weeks later. One day my parents called me to say they needed to talk to me about something important. I went to their house that same night, and when I arrived I noticed that Sebastian was also there with a downcast expression, very different from his usual arrogance. We sat in the living room, and my dad began to speak. He told me they had a very serious problem and needed my help. It turned out that Sebastian's company was in serious financial trouble. He had made bad investments, trusted partners who scammed him, and had taken out loans that he now could not repay. The situation was so dire that the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and creditors were pressing to collect. My mom started crying as she explained that they had used all their savings to help Sebastian pay some debts, but there was still a lot of money missing. My dad said they had thought about selling the house, but that would not be enough to cover all the debts. Then they both looked at me with a pleading expression and asked me to help them. They said that since I now had a successful restaurant, I surely had a good income, and could lend them money to save Sebastian from bankruptcy. My brother, for the first time in his life, looked at me without arrogance. He seemed genuinely worried and scared. I remained silent, processing all this information. After years of being belittled, of being treated like the son who did not matter, of enduring ridicule and humiliation, now they were coming to ask me for help because the favorite son had failed. I felt many emotions at the same time: anger, satisfaction, pity, resentment. Finally, I told them that I was very sorry about Sebastian's situation, but I was not going to put up a single penny to help him. My parents' jaws dropped as if they could not believe what they had just heard. My mom asked me how I could be so selfish with my own family. My dad told me that family helps each other in difficult times, and that I had a moral responsibility to help my brother. I reminded them of all the times they did not help me when I needed it, all the times they chose Sebastian over me, all the humiliations I had to endure while they supported him unconditionally. I told them that I had built my life with my own effort, without anyone's help, and that Sebastian would have to do the same, that he should solve his own problems and learn from his mistakes. Sebastian exploded and yelled at me that I was a miserable, resentful person who had never gotten over his jealousy of him. I calmly replied that it had nothing to do with jealousy but with responsibility, that he had mismanaged his company and now had to face the consequences. The argument became very tense, and I finally left the house without changing my position. Over the next few weeks, my parents called me constantly, asking me to reconsider my decision. They sent me messages saying that Sebastian was in a very bad emotional state and that his life was ruined. I stood firm because I knew that if I gave in, I would be validating all the years of mistreatment and favoritism I had suffered. Besides, I really did not have the money they thought I did because I was not the real owner of the restaurant. But they did not know that, and I did not plan on telling them the truth. One day, Marcus called me and said he needed me to travel to another city for 2 days to meet with potential suppliers who could improve the quality of some ingredients we used. It was part of my responsibilities as manager, so I accepted immediately, but I had a problem. I was always present at the restaurant supervising everything and needed to leave someone trustworthy in charge while I was away. I thought of several of my employees, but finally an idea came to me. I asked my dad, Hugo, to do me the favor of being at the restaurant for those 2 days as a temporary manager. I explained that I just needed him to supervise to make sure everything was running smoothly and to call me immediately if any major problems arose. My dad accepted with surprising enthusiasm. I thought that maybe he was trying to improve our relationship after the recent tensions. I gave him clear instructions that he was not to make any important decisions and that he was only a supervisory presence. I introduced him to the entire staff and told them that my dad would be in charge temporarily while I was on a trip. Everyone understood and agreed. I left peacefully, thinking that everything would be fine. I had no idea of the nightmare that awaited me upon my return. The trip was successful. I managed to negotiate very good contracts with top-quality suppliers that would improve our menu and reduce costs. I was very excited to return and tell Marcus about these achievements. When I got back 2 days later, I headed straight to the restaurant because I wanted to see how everything had gone in my absence. But when I arrived at the location, I found something I never imagined. The restaurant was completely empty. There were no tables, no chairs, nothing in the dining room. I ran to the kitchen, and it was also empty. The stoves had disappeared. The refrigerators were gone. The utensils had been removed. Everything, absolutely everything, had been taken. I went into total panic. I called my employees to ask what had happened, but none of them answered. I called my dad again and again and again, but his phone was off. I stood in the empty restaurant feeling my world collapse. All the years of work, my reputation, the trust Marcus had placed in me, everything was at stake, and I did not understand what had happened. Finally, I decided to go directly to my parents' house to demand an explanation because my dad had been responsible during my absence. I arrived at my parents' house in a fury. I knocked on the door desperately, and when my mom opened it, I practically pushed the door to get in. I found my parents and Sebastian sitting in the living room with very calm expressions, almost with smiles on their faces. I yelled at my dad, asking what the hell had happened to the restaurant. Why was everything empty? Where were the things? My dad looked at me with a mocking smile and began to laugh. That laugh chilled me to the bone because I realized something very bad happened. My dad, between laughs, explained that he had sold absolutely everything in the restaurant: the tables, the chairs, the stoves, the refrigerators, the cutlery, the plates, the glasses, everything that had any value. He said he had contacted restaurant equipment buyers and had sold everything at very good prices. When I screamed at him how he could have dared to do such a thing, he simply shrugged and said they needed that money to pay Sebastian's debts, and that since I had refused to help, they had decided to take what was fair. My mom added that after all, they had raised and fed me for 18 years, so I owed them that help, that it was the least I could do for my brother. Sebastian, for his part, laughed in my face and told me with all possible sarcasm, "Now you are unemployed. Poor you, look at you now." It was in that moment that I realized what they had really done. They thought the restaurant was mine, and that by selling everything, they were punishing me for not helping them. They thought they had left me with nothing and felt victorious. My dad told me I no longer had a restaurant and that I was in ruins, just like Sebastian was before they helped him. The three of them laughed at me as if it were the best joke in the world. But then something inside me clicked. The whole situation was so absurd, So ironic, so perfectly disastrous that I could not help it. I burst out laughing. I started laughing so hard my stomach hurt. My parents and Sebastian stopped laughing and looked at me confused. My mom asked me what was so funny. My dad told me to stop acting like a crazy person, but I could not stop laughing. I was laughing because they were finally going to get exactly what they deserved after so many years. I was laughing because their plan to punish me had just become their own condemnation. When I finally managed to control my laughter, I looked at the three of them and told them with the biggest smile of my life that there was one small detail they forgot to consider. That restaurant was not mine. I never explicitly said I was the owner. I just said I had a restaurant, and they assumed the rest. The truth is I was the general manager, the one in charge, the administrator. But the real owner was a foreigner named Marcus, who had invested all his money in that business. Their faces changed immediately. Sebastian's smile vanished. My mom turned pale. My dad was left with his mouth open, unable to utter a word. I told them to keep laughing, to enjoy their victory, because the consequences of what they had done would come very soon. Sebastian was the first to react and started yelling that I was a liar, that I had tricked them, that this was all my fault for pretending to be the owner. My mom started crying, saying, "How could I do this to them? Why did I lie about being the owner?" My dad looked at me with a mixture of terror and rage. I tried to explain that I never directly said I was the owner, that I only told them about the restaurant, and they drew their own conclusions. But they were not listening. They were too busy blaming me for their own stupidity. I told them that the only thing I had done was tell them I had a restaurant to see their reactions, that I wanted them for once to feel proud of me, or at least for Sebastian to feel some humility upon seeing that I could also be successful. I never imagined they would be capable of selling everything just to punish me. They continued yelling and blaming me, but I was already leaving. I told them to wait for the call from the real owner because this was not going to be the end of it. I left that house knowing that my life was about to get much more complicated, but that at least justice would finally be served. The next day, I received the call I was expecting. It was Marcus, and he sounded furious. He asked me what the hell had happened to the restaurant because he had received photos from some customers who tried to visit and found it completely empty. I took a deep breath and told him the whole truth. I explained that I had left my father in charge for 2 days, and that he had sold absolutely all the restaurant equipment. I told him it had been a terrible misunderstanding because my father thought I was the owner when in reality I was just the manager. Marcus was silent for a moment, processing the information, and then asked if I had my father's details. I gave him all my parents' information and explained that they had sold everything to pay my brother's debts. Marcus told me that this was a clear case of theft and embezzlement, that he had invested over $200,000 in that restaurant between the equipment, remodeling, and inventory. He asked if I had been involved in the theft, and I assured him I had not, that I had been on a trip and had all the proof. He seemed to believe me and said he would contact his lawyers immediately to file a lawsuit. He asked me to gather all possible evidence, including testimonies from the employees who could confirm that my father had been in charge those days. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare. Marcus hired the best lawyers he could find, and they filed a formal lawsuit against my parents and Sebastian for aggravated theft and selling of others' property. The police got involved and began an investigation. They interrogated all the restaurant employees who confirmed that I had introduced my father to them as the temporary manager, and that he had been the one who authorized the sale of all the equipment. They also tracked down the buyers, who had acquired the equipment, and recovered some items, although most had already been sold to third parties. My parents tried to argue that they thought the restaurant was mine and therefore had the right to sell things to help their other son. But Marcus's lawyers proved that this was not a valid defense. Even if it had been my restaurant, they had no legal right to sell anything without my authorization. Furthermore, they found evidence that my father had forged my signature on some sales documents to make it seem like he had authorization. That made their legal situation much worse because now they also faced charges of document forgery. The trial was quick because the evidence was overwhelming. My parents and Sebastian were found guilty. The judge ruled that they must pay full compensation to Marcus, which included the value of all the stolen equipment plus damages for the temporary closure of the restaurant. The total sum was almost $300,000. Since they did not have that money and refused to sell their house to pay, the judge had no choice but to sentence them to prison. My dad, Hugo, received 4 years, my mom, Nora, 3 years for complicity, and Sebastian, 2 years for profiting from the stolen money, knowing its illicit origin. I watched them being taken away in handcuffs after the sentencing. My mom was crying inconsolably. My dad looked at me with pure hatred. Sebastian simply hung his head in defeat. I did not feel joy or sadness, just a deep sense of justice. They had made their decisions, and now they were paying the consequences. Several relatives blamed me for not helping to pay the compensation to keep them out of jail, but I stood firm. It was not my responsibility to save them from their own stupidity and greed. Marcus surprisingly decided to give me another chance. He recognized that I had had nothing to do with the theft and that I had been an exemplary employee all those years. He helped me re-equip the restaurant, and we reopened it 3 months later. Las Delicias de Nico was back in business with the same success as before, even better because the publicity from the case attracted many curious customers. Marcus was so grateful for my loyalty and my work during the crisis that he offered to make me a minority partner in the restaurant. I accepted immediately and finally became a real co-owner. Life has many twists and turns, and in the end, the truth always comes to light. I, who was the scorned son, the dishwasher who would never amount to anything according to them, am now the co-owner of a successful restaurant while they are behind bars. I did not need their money or their support to succeed. I only needed determination, hard work, and the right opportunities. And the best part is that now I sleep peacefully, knowing that I will never have to endure their humiliations again. I am free, I am at peace, and I am finally exactly where I deserve to be. Stepping back from the personal emotions of the protagonist, this sequence of events leaves us with a profound look at the law of cause and effect. Every choice of endurance in the past comes with a heavy price in the future, and every act of arrogance eventually meets a moment of reckoning. In many ways, this story is less about one family and more about a pattern that quietly exists in countless households: favoritism disguised as love, sacrifice demanded from the stronger child, and the dangerous belief that family loyalty means tolerating injustice. When a system like that lasts long enough, it creates a toxic loop. One child grows entitled, another learns to survive without support, and the parents slowly lose the ability to recognize the damage they helped create. In this case, the collapse did not come from hatred alone. It came from years of small decisions. A brother who was never forced to face consequences, parents who believed protecting one child justified neglecting another, and a son who quietly carried the weight of humiliation until the moment he finally refused to carry it anymore. What happened next was not a dramatic revenge plot. It was simply reality catching up with a long history of imbalance. When I look back at the events now, what stands out most is not the courtroom, the sentences, or even the shocking moment when the restaurant was emptied. It is the uncomfortable truth that many people still struggle to accept. Setting boundaries is often mistaken for betrayal. Society teaches us phrases like family must always come first, but it rarely talks about what happens when that idea becomes a weapon. Sometimes the very people who demand loyalty are the ones who misuse it the most. And that is where the real turning point lies. Saying no to manipulation is not destroying a family. Refusing to sacrifice your life to fix someone else's reckless choices is not cruelty. In many cases, it is the first honest step toward breaking a cycle that should have ended years earlier. The courage to stand firm often looks cold from the outside, especially to those who benefit from the old system. But courage is rarely comfortable, and justice rarely feels gentle to those who never expected to face it. Perhaps the most powerful part of this story is not that someone finally succeeded after years of being underestimated. It is that the truth revealed something deeper. Respect cannot be forced through blood ties, and responsibility cannot be outsourced forever. Eventually, everyone must live with the consequences of the choices they make. So let me leave you with one difficult question to think about. If the people who hurt you for years suddenly needed your help to escape the consequences of their own actions, would protecting family unity mean saving them, or finally allowing them to face the results of what they chose to do?